Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell, and here we are once again, 1 o'clock Eastern on Monday, and it is time for Thrive, turning uncertainty into competitive advantage. The show where we dive into the steps, discuss the strategies, everything that you need to know to make all of this uncertainty start working for you. And let me tell you, today you are in for a treat because I have the legendary Bruce Turkel to talk to us about branding and really what we need to do to stand out in today's marketplace and to answer the question we have all wanted the answer to. Is this all there is? All right, Bruce, I'm going to hit the video and we are going to rock and roll and dive. All right. We spent a lot of time here in the green room, which was my fault because I could just talk to Bruce Turkel all day long. But Bruce, for those couple of people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about exactly what you do, but a little bit about your story.
Okay. By the way, let me just say, you set a very high bar when you said we're going to deal with all these things that are going on and tell you what to do about it. There's an awful lot of things going on. So
yeah, and we only have about 25 minutes, so maybe
we're going to deal with deal with some of them. So very quick story because nobody wants, even my grandmother doesn't want to hear my story again. I grew up on Miami Beach. After college, I moved to New York. I had a degree in design. I wanted to be a designer, work in a design firm. I worked at an ad agency as an art director, moved back to Miami after a while. And I worked at a few agencies and I thought, I can do this. I couldn't, but I didn't know better. It's what my father called the confidence of ignorance. So I started a firm, and that was 30 years ago. I was quite young when I started it, but we grew and grew and grew. We did really well. Eventually we had offices throughout Latin America, offices here in Miami. 5 years ago, I sold the business. We worked for clients like Bacardi, Discovery Channel, Miami Tourism, Citicorp, Schwab. But 5 years ago, enough was enough, and I sold the business. And I had written a bunch of books on branding and marketing. But I decided I wanted to write something new. I wanted to write a book for everyone who's trying to answer the question you brought up. Is that all there is? People who have had successful lives feel guilty not being happy or fulfilled with what they have and kind of trying to figure out what to do next. Now, marketing people do lots of research and we try to figure out coming trends. I have to tell you, I was not smart enough to know that a worldwide pandemic would shut down the entire world. And everybody would say almost in unison, is that all there is? Now what? But that's what I wrote the book on. So that's what I'm now doing, working with my clients, working with my friends to help them figure out how to take their businesses and their lives where they want them to go.
Why does a pandemic, because you're right, it became the worldwide question, right? I mean, is this all there is? Why does it take that, or why does that push it to the edge where we say we have to explore this question? Because I feel like after this, whether we're after pandemic, we're still in pandemic. I mean, who knows? It's so confusing every day. But while we're living in this massive uncertainty, there is a sea change. I mean, it seemed to have level set us or pull us back to say, what do we really want or what's important?
Well, you said the right word because you said push it to the edge. You see, this was already happening.
Yeah.
Because of the internet, because of globalization, because of the democratization of information. You remember in the old days, if you were good at what you did, you kind of were the best in your geographic area. You would be successful. You had competition, but it was within a space that you could understand. But once the internet meant we can get anything from anyone at any time, anywhere, all of a sudden, everything changed. But it was, to use your term again, sea change. It didn't happen so quickly. The sea was rising. It's kind of like climate change. We all know it's happening, but we don't see it happening this second. So we're able to say, well, we'll see what happens. And that's what was happening with this change in our lives. And then came the pandemic where everybody instantly got kicked in the head. Either you had lockdown, so your business went away, or you and I travel around the world speaking at conferences. And I don't know about you, but in 2020, March 10th, I was in San Diego. March 11th, I was in Vegas. March 15th, I was in Los Angeles. And then
nowhere.
It just ended. It didn't taper off, People didn't say, well, your mother dresses you funny and we're not going to call you next year. It just ended. And I had the best calendar book that I had ever had. So, you don't have to have that happen too many times to realize, wow, things have changed. Then add in that a lot of people lost loved ones. I mean, now 750,000 Americans have died. The numbers are astounding. And then we all figured out, wait a second, we can use these technologies. We can work from home. We can do conferences on Zoom. We don't have to live and go in next to the office and go in every day. So all of these things, it was the perfect storm. It all happened at once. Let's add two more things and then I'll shut up. Thing number one, based on our age group, an age group-ish, I would say, is 40 plus, we are all going through a collective midlife crisis. Now, people say, no, it's not a midlife crisis. I'm not middle-aged. But the question is, how long you think you're going to live? You don't know what midlife is until you know what end of life is. So 35 to 40 on, you could say, is midlife-ish. That's happening. Number two, anybody who is a millennial or a boomer, we are sadly losing our parents, the greatest generation. It is the greatest transference of wealth in the history of the world. $8 trillion in the US alone is going to be inherited over the next 7 or 8 years. What that means is all of a sudden people are saying, why am I still doing this? I can work from home. I'm about to get this money, or I'm not going to get this money. I survived all these terrible things. I've got the internet. I've got my cameras. It's just boom, perfect storm. That's why it's happening.
There's so many things that I loved about this book, but one of the things is that I feel like you're helping people begin to understand that they are in control, that there's that they can start to make decisions about what they want to do and how they want to do that. And I found that kind of ironic because the most anxiety that people are feeling is out of control, right? I mean, you don't know, is this Delta thing, is this one going to be gone? Is there another strain coming? Will we all go on lockdown again? What is the workplace going to look like now? Should I stay at my job? Should I change my job? Do I even have to do this way anymore? I mean, but in this book, you answer a lot of questions, but you start to help me see that I can start to control my destiny. And I was just kind of curious if that's sort of some of the premise behind it.
That is the premise behind it. Thank you for picking up on that. If you know the song, Is That All There Is, the Peggy Lee song, the lyrics are quite, I thought, depressing because it talks about this happens and all these terrible things. And then she says, so let's keep dancing. If that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. But when she was interviewed, she said that when she was presented with the lyrics, she didn't see them as depressing at all. What she saw them was realistic.
Yeah.
All these things are going to happen. My father used to have a saying, no matter how successful you are, one day you get the call. And the call could be, the doctor calling to say, hey, we got your test results back and it's not such good news. The call could be someone saying, hey, I'm sorry to tell you, but your mom, your uncle, your spouse was in a car accident. The call being the bank saying, hey, we're looking at your account. Whatever it is, no one promised you a rose garden, right? So my dad said, one day you're going to get the call. So in the meantime, as Peggy Lee said, you might as well dance. Yeah. And so I started to talk to people and I wanted to understand what this was all about. And what I realized was, by the way, none of this is new. I mean, we think it is because of technology, because of this pandemic and everything else. But Socrates said thousands of years ago, first know thyself. And what I realized was if you say to people, what do you want? Meridith, you'd be stunned. They don't know.
Yeah.
They'll say things like, I want to be happy. I want to be fulfilled. Okay, that's nice, but that's kind of like a Hallmark greeting card, right? And it reminded me that when we used to get hired by big companies to do their branding, we'd say, what do you want? How are you going to judge us? And they would say things like, we want more business.
Yeah.
Well, really? I mean, what company doesn't? Or we want more revenue. Yeah, that's kind of why we're in business. But do you want more revenue from existing clients? Do you want more acquisition? Do you want fewer clients who spend more money? Do you want less clients, but I'm sorry, more clients who spend less money? Do you want to be evolved? Yeah. And very few companies, believe it or not, had thought of that. But now I'm finding very few people have thought of it either. And if you take the time not to respond to the bad stuff, but to think about what do I actually want? Where do I want to go? I don't mean I want to go to Paris, but I mean, where do I want to go in my life on this journey? All of a sudden you realize what you said. You are in control.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff happens. What matters is how you react to what happens.
One of my favorite sections is the section kind of in keeping in voice with this is that you're not alone, is that you said, this isn't new. We've been wrestling with it, forever. And so highlight just some of the, some of the stories or some of the people you highlighted there and they're wrestling with this journey.
Sure. You know the old saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every solution looks like a nail. We've all heard that. So
right.
I'm a marketing guy. One of the first things we do is go out and talk to consumers. More importantly, we talk to potential consumers to figure out what they want, why they're not happy with existing products, so we could help our clients, right? So I did the same thing here. I mean, I tell my own story, but that's only one person's opinion. And what do they say? We teach what we need to learn. So I went out to speak to people who had been successful in their lives and had major pivots. And then I said to them, okay, tell me your story. How did you get to where you are? And then they would talk for an hour, 2 hours. I would record it. I would listen. And everybody's story is fascinating. But what I found was there's lots of differences, right? But there's also lots of similarities. And here was my biggest takeaway, which I got to tell you, I don't even think is in the book because it's more meta than actually a specific detail. Everybody's facts are different. You grew up, here, I grew up there. You went to school here, I went to school there. You speak this language, I speak that language, whatever. Everybody's facts are different, but everybody's truths are the same.
Yeah.
And we are human beings. Our issues are universal. It's why the best stories touch us because we relate to them because the facts change, but the truths stay the same. So by talking to a bunch of people, I was able to find out what did they do? How did they do it? One woman had worked for the NIH. She always wanted to do that. She got the job. She was married. She had 2 little kids. They bought this big home. They were restoring it. And one day her husband walks in and says, I'm out of here. And left her. Oh, she had left her job, by the way, to take care of the family. So left her with no job, 2 little girls, and this giant house she could not afford. What did she do? How did she move forward? One guy went to MIT. He was a mountain climber in high school. He grew up in Colorado, went to MIT, and after a year, just completely flunked out, couldn't deal with it. He went back to Colorado, became a climbing guide. He climbed Denali. He climbed all these incredible mountains. He went back to MIT, got his degree, joined the Army, became a Green Beret, did his time in the Army as a Green Beret, and then went to Harvard and got his MBA. How do you do that, especially when you failed out of college the first time? But he tells the story quite openly. One guy was a basketball player. He was really good, and he became the captain of the team at the University of Miami 2 years in a row, but he never got drafted. He went to Europe. He played in the professional leagues in Europe, made a bunch of money, learned to speak Italian, learned to speak German, loved it. At age 30, he got a tryout with the Lakers, which was his dream, and he didn't make it. And he says, these are his words, a 30-year-old who looks like me and doesn't make the pros becomes a substitute teacher, a bouncer, or a security guard.
Wow.
I didn't want to do any of those things. What does he do? And then he tells the story of what he did and how he changed his life. And now he's incredibly successful. He owns a credit card processing company. He has 2 beautiful little girls, a great marriage. And each one of these stories is different. As I say, the facts are totally different. One guy was born in Jamaica. There's a woman who was born in Haiti. There's a guy who was born in Venezuela, a bunch of people who were born in the States, men, women, a guy who had been molested, a guy who was a drug addict, a guy who had horrible, horrible diseases, other people who built these incredible businesses. The facts were all different, but the truths are all universal.
So why, when you do a book like this and you do the research, those are some of the hardest transitions people ever make. It's interesting because I have kids headed off to college in my life, not my children headed up, but in my life. And there's so much pressure on children today, so much pressure. I think I would have just caved under the weight of the pressure. But this but this so much emphasis on perfection and so little emphasis on resilience. And you know, and from what you just painted in those pictures is life is just full of you signed up and it didn't turn out how you wanted it
Right.
to, through no fault of your own. You know, I mean, you're doing everything you're supposed to do, and then life just throws something at you. And so, what is it, and why do people struggle so much with that piece to realize that the door just slammed shut? I have to find another door to open.
Well, there's lots of reasons. And,
Mhm.
and that was a very perceptive question because you dealt with a couple issues that are really intrinsic to everybody's issue. Number one is a sense of self-esteem, self-reliance, self-respect, all of
Mhm.
those things, the way you respond to these issues, the belief that, to your point, everything's going to be hunky-dory and then things turn out different.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily make mistakes. Things just turn out wrong. But part of the issue, and I didn't know this before I started writing the book, there's a guy in the book by the name of Ed Wasserman.
Mhm.
Ed just retired as the dean of journalism at Berkeley. And Ed said something that I thought was fascinating. He said, you look back on your life. If you're talking, I guess he's in his early 70s. If you're talking to people who are at an advanced age, they look back at their life and we all want to be the hero in our own stories.
Mhm.
So we stitch the stories together in a linear fashion that make sense. He says, but that's not the way your life went. You just don't
Right.
realize that. He says, you think I planned all this out. I studied this. Then I moved to this city to take this job and I got this. And then I did that. And that led me to this. And this didn't work, but I was able to pivot and I did that. He said, that's what you think. But the truth is, you move to that city, you take a job, you look at the desk next to you, there's a cute girl sitting there. And 2 years later, you're married and you have a kid. He says, you didn't plan that. Ed says that he had 4 kids before he really got his career going. He said, our idea of planning was, your what? Family planning, I mean. Your what? He says that incremental rationality is you go up the stairs, you have a problem, you fix it. You go up the stairs, you find another problem, you fix it. And so many people in the book, because they were so willing to say, hey, I did this wrong, I screwed this up. This
Yeah.
went well, but then this happened. There's another gentleman, his name is Terry Bell. Terry sold the largest independent advertising agency in Canada. He was a 1/3 partner. They sold it at the height of the market, made a bunch of money, great multiples. He said, and then a few years later, he moved to Halifax, got married to the love of his life, not a trophy wife per se, but truly the love of his wife.
Yeah.
They had young children. And then he gets diagnosed with an awful disease. I mean, awful. I mean, he was about to die. He went through radical surgery and he survived and he did really well. So he says, people say to me, do you ever ask yourself, why me? And he says, no. I asked myself, why not me? He goes, look, the day after we sold the business, I went online, I looked up my account and I saw that big number. I didn't say, why me?
Right.
He said, these things happen. This
Mhm.
stuff happened to me. The good stuff happened. The bad stuff happened. He said, I am truly blessed to live a life of prosperity where I have dominion over my days.
Mhm.
He says, it's, to your point, it's all about this sense of control. But if you start believing, why me? You can't only believe it for the bad stuff. You got to believe it for the good stuff. And nobody does that.
Yeah. I thought about that when the housing crisis happened back in 2008 and everybody wanted bailed out. And I thought nobody was coming to, the federal government or the banks and saying, I really got overpaid for this. You should, like everybody was fine when they were flipping houses and, making a windfall. But the
Right.
moment the bottom falls out, and I wonder, I feel like years ago I wrote a book about responsibility because I feel like responsibility is the greatest gift you can give yourself. It's like once I figured out that I was responsible for every situation I was in. Now, sometimes it wasn't fair. I mean, circumstances, it wasn't fair, but I was responsible in every situation. I was choosing to stay or not to go or to do this or that. It was ultimate freedom, right? Like all of it, because I could control me and what I did with me. The moment I was blaming everybody else, I was stuck because I was a victim. And I really felt like society has started to make it more attractive to be not responsible and be somebody else's fault. And I feel like with that, we're taking away the greatest gift that we get as an individual, is to realize at the end of the day, even when life isn't fair, you still get to make choices.
Well, I think, again, it goes back to
Yeah.
the idea that none of this is new. What you discovered, philosophers have been writing about this for thousands of years. I mean, my mother, obviously the most important philosopher in my life, my mother's answer to anything we said as kids was, life's not fair.
Yeah.
Get over it. I don't even want to hear about it. It's
right.
in her consideration set. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, who spent time in Auschwitz or I forget which, Belsenbach, whichever camp he was in. He said they took away his health, they took away his strength, they took away his riches, they took away dominion over his days. He said, I realized the only thing they could not take away from me was my own sense of how I would respond.
Mm-hmm.
He said, that's completely up to me no matter what. Frankl was World War II, so that was what, 80 years ago.
80 years ago.
But you can go back to the Romans, to the Stoics. That was Marcus Aurelius, and thousands of years of Stoic belief that the only thing we control is ourselves. Everything else is out of our control. You might think you control things,
right.
But the pandemic is perfect proof that we don't, because I don't care how successful your speaking business or my speaking business was, how good we were on stage, how well we had built up our clientele, our referrals, our bureau connections. It went away. Now, you want to take that personally and say, yeah, they did that to me? Feel free. But it's not a particularly useful attitude.
Right.
It had nothing to do with you or with me. It happened. The only thing we control, to your point, is our sense of responsibility. It happened. Now what can we make of it?
So was this book something that you did it come to you in the middle of the pandemic? Is it something that had been in the back of your mind that you'd always wanted to write?
No, here's what happened. I had written, in fact, they're all behind me. You can see them up there on the shelf. I had written 5 books on marketing. The last one was called All About Them, and I think it was a pretty good book.
Yeah.
And my publisher wanted the sequel to All About Them. I started to write it, but to be honest, I had no interest in it. I don't want to write another marketing branding book. I've done enough of them. You can go back and read the other ones. The stuff doesn't change so quickly. And I had thought about this process I was going through, but here was what happened. Friends of mine, all of whom were successful, lawyers, doctors, business people, were always coming to me. Hey, can I take you to lunch? I want to pick your brain. And I always thought they wanted branding advice. But what they would tell me was how unhappy they were doing whatever it was they were doing, even though they were successful, both professionally and also financially. And so I'm thinking, first of all, why are they coming to me? What I realized was, because somebody told me actually, that I had this successful business, but more importantly, I was, traveling around the world, speaking at conferences, traveling around the world, shooting commercials, writing books, playing in a band. They thought that I had this creative life that they wanted. I didn't have an answer for them, but what I told each one of them was, you know what? So many people ask me this question. It's in the zeitgeist. It's in the water. It's in our atmosphere. People are having this issue. Maybe you should keep a journal. Maybe you should have, carry a little notebook around with you and write down what's going on, because I don't know, there's going to be some value in your journey. This went on and on enough times. I'll spare you the long story, but at some point I kind of went, why don't I take my own advice? So, and because of something that happened, not bad, just that opened my eyes. And so I went and I started writing the book, and I wrote the first 2 chapters in like 3 days. This had never happened to me before, Meridith. I like writing. I'm not one of those guys who says, oh my God, it's so hard. I don't find it hard. I enjoy it. But I never actually just sat down and when I got done, my manuscript was 700 pages.
Wow.
My editor said, okay, this would be a 1,000-page book. Nobody will read it. Nobody will buy it, except if they want to press flowers. So we actually had to edit it way, way down. But I was so turned on by the project and by the people I met that it became a labor of love. Now, I'm not prescient enough to know that a worldwide pandemic was going to come and kick everyone in the head and make everybody say, is that all there is? It happened while I was writing the book. I was already 2 years into the book when it happened. I finished it up. I added some pandemic mentions and got the book out.
So it is hard to believe that we are coming to the close of this show. How do people find out about the book? How do they find out more about you? And how do they find the answer to the question, is that all there is?
Question 1, how to find out about the book? Go to Amazon. I mean, is that all there is? Bruce Turkel. It's easy to find. It's other places, but that's the easy way. Let's face it. How do they find out more about me? Go to my website. It's just my name, bruceturkel.com, Turkel. My phone number's on there. My email address is on there. You can contact me. You can get the link to the book from my website, anything you want. How do they answer, is that all there is? Not as easy, but not that difficult. Well, let me rephrase it. It's easy to explain. It's difficult to do.
Yeah.
Figure out who you are. Figure out what you want. Once you have that firmly in mind, figuring out how to get it is not that difficult. Figuring out what it is, that's difficult. I've built a bunch of exercises I've been putting on Strategic Roundtable.
Great.
Because everything we did for our clients, I can now do for people to show them how to find what they want.
Well, thank you, Bruce. It has been great having you here today. I put it up there. Really recommend. Like I said, I'm halfway through it. I can't wait to finish it. Is That All There Is by Bruce Turkel. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to everyone for watching another episode of Thrive, turning all this uncertainty into your competitive advantage.
All this, and boy, that's a high bar.
We may not have answered it all, but we definitely put you closer to the solution. We'll see you here next week at 1 p.m. Eastern every Monday. See you next time.